Welcome to the latest episode of 5 on the Floor in the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app, on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the 5 Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe to Off the Floor. You can find the link right here in the description. It will bypass the Apple upcharge, so it'll just be $2.99 per month. Get access to 10 different channels on there and also access to our stage shows. That's where we're going when news breaks. We go to our stage shows. We bring different people from the 5 Reasons Sports Network on, and you're invited to listen to us and chat with us there. So check it out. It's Off the Floor, the most heat anywhere. Also, check out the great sponsors of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, including a special sponsor of this particular episode. It's Underdog. Use the code 5, F-I-V-E. You get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. More than 5 million happy players on Underdog and more than 2 billion won. So join them today. Again, you can play the up-downs on various players, whether it's Heat players or their opponents. Jimmy Butler seems to be a popular topic these days. You can play him over or under. There's plenty more on the app to check out as well. So you check it out. Use the code 5, F-I-V-E. Get up to $1,000 in bonus cash instantly. Every player, every stat that you like to see, just select higher or lower on Underdog. The key is you must be at least 18 or 19 in Alabama and Nebraska, 19 in Colorado for some games, 21 in Massachusetts or Arizona, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. If you're concerned with your play, call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. And now, today's episode.
Down to Biscayne. Yeah. 5 on the floor, ride for my dogs. Where here's the thing, you can check the score. Hustle hard, couple scars, wearing bubble frogs. Just like Butler said, you in trouble, y'all. Kept the floor playing, got it all banned. Y'all seen the block, stop with one hand. And Pat, we trust.
You sound scared.
It's about have the guts, we're here to bring the heat. Y'all can hang it up.
Welcome to 5 on the Floor, a daily insider show on the Miami Heat and the NBA, featuring Ethan Skolnick, Greg Sylvander, Alex Toledo, Brady Hawk, and others from the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Also, make sure to subscribe to Off the Floor for the most heat anywhere.
Welcome back to 5 on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick. You can follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick on 5 Reasons Sports. We got Greg Sylvander. You can follow him at Greg Sylvander. We're going to talk about Jimmy Butler. I promise. I wouldn't call it new information because, well, I'll get to it. I'll explain why it's not really new information. It's just putting things into context and perspective. After a crazy week, that was a lot about nothing. Okay, so we'll get to it in a second. First, there's been a trade. The Heat satisfied your trade fix. You tell them that they always run it back. No, they don't. Sometimes they trade backup centers. And they just did it again, just like they traded Dwayne Dedmon last year, of course. Or was it last year? 2 years ago. I'm sorry. And then, well, they let Cody Zeller walk afterwards. And there's been these great incidents right before these backup centers are traded. I mean, remember Dedmon picking up the massage gun on the court, all that. Of course, Cody Zeller had like 3 of the worst minutes in NBA Finals history, which helped the Denver Nuggets to a championship. And in this case, Thomas Bryant did a whole bunch of stuff the last time he played. Remember, he was way short on a 3.
Sean Kemp.
Right. I mean, he just was out of control. Okay. And I mean, our Matt Hannafin on the Playback channel perfectly described it, put out the tweets so that, again, when we have the Thomas Bryant statue, we make sure it looks like him. But they made a trade. And the trade was they've traded Thomas Bryant, who was, I guess, what would you say, their 14th roster spot? Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah.
Kind of?
Yeah.
Because they haven't filled the 15th, right? So they now are down to 13 standard contracts.
Correct. They got 2 weeks to rectify that, and we'll talk about that in a minute.
We'll get into what that's going to be. So they traded Thomas Bryant for a future swap of second-round picks with Indiana, which if it never happens, I don't think anybody cares. This is like that conditional pick that like the Heat gave up for Dwayne Wade. Remember that one? Never vested.
A future second-round pick swap is probably like the least draft capital that could be moved. It's like basically just to be able to make the transaction take place. And it's interesting though, from a lot of perspectives in terms of what it does to Miami going forward. But you're right. Everyone got their shams bomb of Thomas Bryant being traded. The trade can't be finalized till Sunday, but it definitely will be executed then. And that was a surprise. I don't think it was kind of a situation where I bet Miami probably was surprised that Indiana was as desperate as they were for a big, and they took advantage of that and got something for Thomas Bryant in a year when typically you wouldn't think he would have any value on the market.
I mean, it's kind of like second round swap in the future is kind of like swapping a Tootsie Roll for a Hershey's Kiss. Like, I don't even know. I don't even know what we're talking about here. But Thomas Bryant, no longer a member of the Miami Heat, good locker room guy. They brought him back. There was that whole issue that fans had with him opting out and why they took him back after he opted out and all that. But there are some repercussions to it. So we'll get into that. And then I'll get into the Jimmy stuff probably on the other side of the break. The first thing is, again, as we mentioned, they're down to 13. And by the way, they're sending him to Indiana. He played college ball in Indiana, so he gets to go home. So that's a good thing for him. Basically, now they're down to 13, okay? Now, this is what we think they're going to do. I don't really have the information on this yet, but it would certainly point to something like this, which is that you have a guy on a two-way contract. There are three players in the Heat that are on two-way contracts now. Drew Smith, Keshad Johnson, and Josh Christopher. Christopher and Isaiah Stevens in particular have been really good down at Sioux Falls.
And Keshad down there is like the best player there, but obviously he's been up recently with the big team. Well,
but last year, of course, Alondas Williams looked like the best player there, and then the Heat parted ways with him this summer. But yes, Keshad Johnson has looked really, really good when he's been down there. But the bigger thing is that Drew Smith, and we had Drew on the pod, and we've featured Drew a lot lately, played 34 minutes in the last game and is now closing games. And Eric Spoelstra basically admitted he can't take him off the floor because he does too many good things. He's on a two-way. And so there's only a certain number of games that a guy can play on a two-way. So before the season, I think you and I both believe that at some point, Keshad Johnson would be elevated to a standard contract. Was that your lean? Because that was my lean before the year.
Yeah. I thought he would be the most ready of them. And I want to go on record as saying I didn't understand the Drew Smith fascination. And I was against him being one of the guys who got a two-way spot. And I was completely wrong. Eric Spoelstra, right again, because it just took a little bit more time. But you're right. They can't take him off the floor. And the thing with the two-way guys, and we talked a little bit about this on Discord, is, you can only have a limited number of days that they can contribute up playing in regular season games before they run out of eligibility. So you want to convert Drew Smith earlier if you can. One, because, I guess you could let those days go, but they need him going forward. And the fact that I'm saying that out loud is just another testament to this coaching staff being a lot smarter than sometimes the fans are. No shot to the fans, but it kind of was the situation where Drew Smith was screamed about, and now he is probably going to get a roster spot.
Not only does he have a roster spot, most likely, and again, I think that's the most obvious thing that they would do, is that they would basically convert him to a standard, and then you would open up a two-way contract. You still have a roster spot, but you open up a two-way contract, which could be Isaiah Stevens, sort of the next point guard in the pipeline, who again has played very well down at Sioux Falls. But not only does he have that, but Drew now has a nickname. I just want to present this to everybody because we covered this with Drew on the last podcast, so I wanted to follow up. We took nickname suggestions for Drew because he doesn't have one. He said he wouldn't mind one, but Haywood Highsmith tried to give him his, which is the locksmith, and I just don't think somebody should take somebody else's nickname just because Haywood happens to be as unassuming and modest as Drew is. Probably two most unassuming Heat players I've ever encountered in my life. Okay, and so we wanted him to have his own nickname. So we got about 100 suggestions. I whittled it down to 20, and I showed them to both Highsmith and to Drew Smith after the game. And Drew basically just put his hand on my shoulder and said, just pick whatever you want. So I'm not smart enough to pick nicknames because I had a nickname growing up and I picked my own nickname, and you're not really supposed to do that. So I approached the captain because if Bam, he should do it. He's the captain. Like, he should make a decision.
You would. So that would have been Udonis's role last year, and you went to the next best guy. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and Udonis just would have growled at me. But Bam was very receptive to it, and I scrolled through the list of 20 nicknames, including Jumanji, Jiu-Jitsu, all kinds of different names for Drew. Two Live Drew, which I thought was a particularly good one with the Miami tie and all that. But Bam chose Code Drew. And his reasoning, he actually gave this some thought very quickly. See, Bam processing very quickly when it comes to these things. He didn't hesitate like he does sometimes when he's taking a mid-range jumper. Like he went right into it. He says because it's like an emergency. And like we throw him into all these situations. It's like a Code Drew. So that's the nickname. Now I have not presented it back to Drew at this point.
But
whether he likes it or not.
It's
right.
done.
He has to take it. It's done. It's over with. So we'll probably be printing those T-shirts. So anyway, I think he's going to get a standard Code Drew. I think is going to get a standard contract. By the way, I have no problem with calling Highsmith and Drew Smith the Locksmiths when they're on the floor together. I just think they should have their own nickname. But there's other possibilities here, Greg. They could do something else. Now, even if they okay, let's say they elevate Drew Smith, give him the standard. Let's say they give Isaiah Stevens a two-way. They give someone else a two-way too. Let's say they give it to Isaiah Stevens. They still have that other roster spot, but they have to wait a little bit to stay under the apron. And that was kind of what we talked about with Nasir Little, where they had to make a decision. If they kept Nasir Little, who by the way is in the G League right now, but if they had kept Nasir Little past what was it, like January 7th or something like that, then they had to guarantee him.
Yeah.
Right. So one thing they could do is they elevate Drew Smith and they wait until more time is past this season, and they get past that marker in terms of how it's going to count from a prorated basis against and they give Keshad Johnson the other standard, or they could go get somebody else, right? It's an option.
And they're 3.7 million below the second apron now. And so that's the wiggle room that you talk about, that they now have to measure against what a prorated salary looks like. And then, you count the days through and see when you can sign the next guy. But they've gotten a lot more flexibility. They have to add a 14th player. You're not allowed to carry 13 for longer than 2 weeks. So this will be resolved quickly. And there are other options and even Brian Goins of Miami Heat Beat, who's on our Off the Floor Discord, was breaking down some of this, how they could potentially now fill their final roster spot with a veteran and probably still stay under the second apron. But I don't expect them necessarily to go in that direction, especially with the guys that have they've found in this rotation. I just don't see anybody being inserted into that right away. So to me, this is about keeping the pipeline, the internal pipeline of players, getting in a better position to keep guys around and getting Drew Smith on a contract where they can play him as much as they want to, which again, mind blown that we've ever even got to the place where we're taught that's what we're saying.
There's another element to this, which is the Khalil Ware element. So I'll touch on that after this. There are a couple point guards that have been out there, defensive-minded point guards that have been out there for a little while. Markelle Fultz and Dennis Smith Jr. in particular that have not signed with anybody. There were some reports today about how the Lakers were looking at Fultz. I know DSJ has had interest in joining the Heat before. He was basically signed, sealed, and delivered if Dame had come. That was the talk at the time. But the Drew Smith emergence kind of makes both of those guys unnecessary. You still have, we did a whole off-floor stage show today on how Rozier seems to have no role whatsoever at this point. His usage is way down. You're not going to bring in another guard. So my thought would be that they probably would bring in another big. And then there were some reports, and I know you spoke to someone who was involved in some of the reporting on this, that James Wiseman, who is, by the way, is injured, so he wouldn't even be a factor this year, but that he could be included in this trade when it's consummated Sunday, or at least they had explored it, but it wouldn't necessarily be to stay in Miami, that he could be rerouted somewhere else.
So Ian Begley of the New York Post, I believe.
I think he's still with the Post or Daily News, one of them. Yeah.
He reported that James Wiseman may be a part of the deal. I checked into it. It sounds like he may be part of the deal. I don't think that that's 100% confirmed from what my understanding is. But if he is, it also is a possibility that he does not land in Miami. And so that expands, obviously that he could end up with a third team. Because he's out for the year, I just don't that probably is the reluctance to take him on a roster spot because he's on a standard contract. So we'll see how it plays out. It could just be a clean trade of Thomas Bryant to Indiana. But if Wiseman is involved, I don't know that he'll land in Miami when it's all said and done.
Former number 2 overall pick in the draft, who was originally supposed to go number 1 in that draft, and I think it's fair to say has been a huge disappointment. Golden State took him, and looking back, probably should have taken LaMelo Ball. But when you look at this situation, the other thing the Heat fans took from it is that there's one fewer big in the big man room now. And Kevin Love has been pretty inconsistent when he's played in terms of what teams you can use him against. So it would seem that there will be more minutes there at some point for Kel'el Ware, who they just brought back from Sioux Falls, was with the team last night. And again, Bryant was playing ahead of Ware earlier this season, so now you don't have that to go to. And Jovic, I guess, could play some backup 5. We saw him play yesterday, so they might lean. But it looks like Ware or Jovic would be sort of next if, again, Spoelstra doesn't lean on Love. And I think there are some games where he may play Kevin in the first half, but not the second, if he's not effective or just isn't feeling it that night. Kevin's still valuable to have around, but I don't know that he wants to play him extended minutes during the regular season anyway, particularly against certain teams like Boston and all that. So could be more Ware. I know people had asked that, but again, you remove a player who Spoelstra was playing ahead of Ware, then yes, more opportunities for Ware. All right, on the other side of this, I'm going to try to sum up where the Jimmy Butler situation stands. And if you came to this for that, you're really annoyed that it took me 17 minutes. All right, we want to tell you about a great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, Water Cleanup of Florida. You can find them at WCUFL.com. If you've got a leak, I think there's a lot of leaks going on in the NBA right now. This is your one-stop water and mold cleanup shop. We should just do a leak segment. Preventative maintenance, they do that. We also do the leak detection, the damage assessment if you need that. They'll work with the insurance companies. Michael Robert is team based in Boca Raton. They service the entire Tri-County area, though. They even help people on the West Coast and Central Florida after the hurricanes and all that. They're just good people, and they know what they're doing. They got more than 100 5-star reviews on Google. So it's Water Cleanup of Florida. Don't get it confused with any of these other restoration companies or anything like that. This is the one that we promote, Water Cleanup of Florida, WCUFL.com. If you've got the schmutz,
they got the guts.
All right. Let's get to this, okay? I'm not going to recap everything that happened with Jimmy Butler this week. The hair, all of that, a lot of the silliness, the name calling on Twitter. I'm just going to tell you where I know it to stand. That's it. So this is as best as I can sum it up. And I'll just say this. If my sources are lying to me about this, they're lying to a lot of people. They're lying to a lot of people because I have never, and I've been at this now in one way or another for 28 years covering this team. I have never seen every media member completely aligned on information. Completely aligned. Because all of us have different people that we talk to. And I can tell you that from the beats, as the Heat called them, the beat writers, the people that that cover the team for, the various newspapers, those who work for the team, who are front facing in terms of presentation to the public because of some of the media work that they do as part of Bally's or other places, all around the arena, the facility, anybody who would know anything, everybody says the same things. Okay. So if the people who are telling us this stuff are lying, they're lying to everybody that they need to continue to deal with. And that just doesn't seem logical to me. So I'm going to stand by. I'm not calling anybody else a liar. I'm not going to do that. I question networks' approaches. I think ESPN specifically has destroyed NBA coverage. I think it's a big reason why you've seen that the ratings are so far down now. Some of it is that Adam Silver's made it impossible to find games for a lot of people, but a lot of it is that ESPN has become all about narratives, scoops, and basically like 3 teams. Okay? Like they don't, and you want to know why people are not watching when team that's interesting and exciting as OKC is playing, or some of these other younger teams. It's because they're still focused on guys who are like in their 20th season, like LeBron, Durant, and Curry. It's just the same teams, the same people all the time, over and over and over. ESPN has let go of brilliant people like Zach Lowe, and they've extended Kendrick Perkins. Okay, that's all right. So I have my issues with approach, and I can tell you the Heat do too. They're not a fan of ESPN's coverage in any way, all right? Or the Boston-based media, that kind of all the Dame stuff and everything else that came out. Remember, that was the worst package in NBA history? Mm-hmm. That was, right now, the guy who would have been headlining that package is probably going to the All-Star game and would be by far the best player on the Portland Trailblazers and better than any other asset that they got in that trade. But only like a couple of them have sort of mea culpa on this, all right? So, again, the Heat have an issue with the way that their team is covered, with the way the league is covered. But I don't call out specific reporters about their sources because I don't know. And I've been in this game long enough to know that sometimes you have to protect certain sources. Sometimes you can't say everything that you know. And that's why I don't really like the news game. I prefer to analyze the game at this point, get to know the personalities, because it is like a cesspool and it's very difficult to navigate. And you're often wrong. I don't think I'm wrong about this one. Okay? Without calling anybody else a liar. The Miami Heat have not received any offers for Jimmy Butler.
That's an update.
They've not received any offers. Like there's all this conversation about where places Jimmy might want to go. It doesn't matter. Like, okay, Shams is lying. He's not lying about, and now you've got Gambo, who has broken a lot of stories with Phoenix. All right, he's a Phoenix radio guy. You got all these people who are saying, "Oh, it's true that." Like, we're talking about a non-story. Like, what is true and what is not true about something that is not relevant to the overall process here? I don't understand why everybody obsessed about this for a week, except for the Heat's theory on this, which is that on the day that this broke, on a Tuesday, there was no NFL and LeBron didn't play. So ESPN had nothing to talk about, so this became the story, and then it started to spread on top of it. Whether Jimmy would be okay playing in Dallas, Houston, Golden State, Timbuktu, Indonesia, it does not matter. What matters is, okay, A, does said team have interest in Jimmy and the resources to get him, whether it's in a trade during the season because they have matching salaries, various assets, etc., or cap space after the season? And does the Miami Heat, this is the other part, have any interest in moving him before the end of the year? And I can tell you right now, not only have the Heat not received any offers, which covers part one of this, they don't have any interest in moving him, which covers part two of this. Their intention at this time is the same as it was this summer when Riley had his press conference. Nothing has changed. It's not that this is a non-story. I mischaracterized this, I think. Okay, Greg, when I said it, it's not a non-story. It's just the same damn story.
Yeah.
There's nothing new. Nothing's happened in the last week or two. Pat Riley had a press conference which irritated people around Jimmy, okay? Because it kind of came out of nowhere. They weren't expecting it, where he got on him about availability and all the rest. It wasn't the gushing praise of Jimmy Butler that Pat has lavished on him rightly so, during the time that he's been in Miami when he's dragged the Heat to 3 conference finals and 2 finals, okay? Jimmy has, right? I mean, there's no question. He's been the catalyst for all of that. Okay, so that press conference didn't go over particularly well, not surprisingly. And at that time, I was told, and I reported it at the time, that Jimmy's inclination, or at least what was being told to me would be Jimmy's inclination, was he was going to opt out at the end of the season. And then we saw that validated to a certain degree on the night of the draft, when the same day Bam signed his extension, where it came out through Shams, by the way, okay, who at the time was not with ESPN, through Shams, that Jimmy would not sign an extension even if the Heat offered it, okay? I reported consistently that Jimmy wants one thing above all else, money. He wants every last damn dollar, which, again, he is entitled to ask for. Just as the Heat are entitled to say, we don't want to give it to you at this point because we want to pay you for your future production and your future availability and what you are now as a player and may become, because Father Time is undefeated, as opposed to what you've done previously. And remember, they went through this same dance with Dwayne. The Lakers went through this dance with Kobe. This is just what happens at the end of players' careers. So just to reset on all of this, all right? That was the story then. We've potted on it several times, okay? Into the season, this was the story hanging over the team. I even joked at one point that sometime around Christmas or thereafter, when ESPN got bored, this would become a story. I guess I was 2 weeks late in terms of my prediction. None of this is surprising, okay? None of this is new. Jimmy wants his money. He wants an extension. He would prefer to be with the Miami Heat. That's what I've been told by people around him. That's what the Heat believe. If you think that the Heat are really at odds with Bernie Lee, specifically the agent, why is Mickey Arison, the owner, retweeting Bernie Lee's comments about Shams? That doesn't sound to me like the two. Again, I don't care about I like Shams personally. I'm just saying, like,
they're aligned.
Does that? Right. They're aligned at least on this. They're not aligned on a contract extension. That's business.
Yeah. And probably years and other stuff.
Correct. Okay. So it just really comes down to this. Okay. Number one is Phoenix, Dallas, which Bobby Marks did a great job outlining all of this. He put out a video. Bobby's a person who I think is worthy of respect at ESPN. He worked in an NBA front office. He's not a bomb thrower. We've had him on the podcast. He knows the Heat very well, by the way, too. He's around a lot. He lives across, I think he still lives, across Alligator Alley. Yeah. Okay. He comes to our area quite a bit. Again, I have tremendous respect for Bobby. He outlined all of this. He basically started this 15-minute video today by saying that the Heat are in control. The Heat are in the driver's seat. The Heat don't have to do anything because they said basically Jimmy's leverage. He said basically Jimmy's leverage is going to a team with cap space. And he's like, and he kept saying, who?
Exactly.
Who?
There's
Heat don't hear of who. Right. Like the teams in Greg, look, Brooklyn's going to have cap space. Okay. Houston's going to have some, but maybe not enough. San Antonio could have cap space. There's like 4 teams that could have cap space. All right. So the Heat are prepared right now, and I'm going to reset because I should have done this all at the very beginning. Number one, they haven't gotten an offer. Okay. So all these teams are supposedly interested. There's no offer right now. Number two is they don't intend to trade him. They intend to ride it out, hope that they can get a playoff Jimmy resurgence. They know it's not going to be quite the same as it was, but they're hoping that they can get his best more of the time maybe than they've gotten it, okay? And there have been some signs lately that they might, although there's also some times where he's very low usage. But Hero's emergence may make that okay in their view. We'll see, all right? We can argue that. Like, we can argue whether they have a series. But you and I have always talked, Greg, about the fact that this team always pushes forward.
Of course.
That's their mindset. That's their DNA. And so, like, if they think they have the slightest chance, like the Jim Carrey thing, so you tell me there's a chance, they're going to push forward.
They're 2 games out of the 3 seed. They have to.
Right. And so they're going to hold on to Jimmy unless they get blown away by an offer. And to this point, there hasn't even been an offer. So there's nothing, again, that happened this week. That's why when you talk to people with the Heat, they're not saying there's no there there. They're just saying there's no there like that's different than it was before. Right. Okay. So I'm just going to reset so everybody understands for when this is aggregated improperly. And again, we apologize for 17 minutes of Thomas Bryant, Drew Smith talk. 1, there's been no offer. 2, the Heat are not shopping him. 3, they do not intend to trade him during this regular season unless they are blown away by an offer. And even then, okay, it was told to me by one person, they probably still wouldn't do it. They are prepared to go into the offseason, and if Jimmy opts out, quote, we'll deal with it then. It is as it was. And then we'll deal with it then. Well, what does that mean? Well, it means that since there's only a handful of teams with cap space and maybe only one that Jimmy might ultimately want to go to if it turns out to be that, Phoenix ain't having cap space at that point. Dallas isn't going to have cap space. Okay, we said maybe Houston. Golden State's not going to have cap space, even though I think that that's a team that may try to pursue Jimmy during the regular season. I mean, do you want to, if you're the Heat, do you want to extend Kuminga? You want to get Pods, who Golden State fans can't wait to get rid of right now? Okay, Jimmy may be in a position at the end of this season where he needs the Heat. Not because necessarily he's coming back to the Heat, but because there are two options that the Heat could help him, get to a place he wants to go, and with his money. One is an opt-in and trade, and the other is a sign and trade. Now, there are some teams that can't be involved in a sign and trade because of hard cap restrictions and aprons and all that stuff. But I guess, Greg, and I'll let you jump in here because I'm just trying to get all the facts out here as I know them.
Yeah.
There's no reason for the Heat to jump, and Bernie's not an idiot. Okay, I know. Like this idea that he's trying to get the Heat to jump, he knows the Heat. He knows the way Pat operates, and he has great respect for the Heat. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
I think some of this was amplified because of the way Bernie went full Kendrick Lamar on Shams and on Twitter. You know what I mean? And like really, some of that was fun to watch. But also Jimmy Butler is his comments post game and stuff like that. Like everybody's looking for every little angle, and ultimately we're at a spot where nothing has really changed. But you're right. I think that the biggest things that I take away from all of the nuggets that just were dropped is the fact that there's no offers tells you that teams are not in the headspace thinking that the Heat are ready to move on imminently, or else they would be like the soundbite of them being open to listening to offers is like never been more apparent as just like word salad, because they ultimately haven't even received an offer. But to me, the fact that they're willing to go into the offseason and basically Jimmy Butler's going to have decisions to make, and if they facilitate him getting elsewhere, but also him opting out means that there is some acceptance with the idea of Jimmy Butler moving on, it tells me that they're prioritizing summer 2026. That's where this ultimately leads to me to some degree, but that's a conversation for another day. But to your point, I think that it is interesting that everyone felt like things were moving swiftly all week because ESPN kept circling back. They did another segment today on it because he had the orange color braids, you know what I mean? So they took that as a way of talking about the Nuggets getting involved for Michael Porter Jr.
The Nuggets, but I thought that was the Suns. And then, so now if he wears green, is it the Mavericks or is it the Celtics? Because I'm confused.
Well, it was the Suns, but they basically, because Bobby Marks is on, he's keeping them honest enough where they can't find a deal for the Suns. So they pivoted to Perkins. Perkins says the Nuggets, and then they bring up the Nuggets on the trade machine, and Marks figured out a deal with Michael Porter Jr. that's completely like just hypothetical, and they're just filling content. And I think that that's ultimately what you saw a lot of this week. I think it's good to hear that while the Heat are playing their best basketball of the season, their franchise player is still aligned with the organization. They may not be aligned at the end of the season when it comes to contract talks, but on the court right now, they're still aligned.
I mean, and again, I'm not around him all the time. Obviously, we don't have the same relationship with Jimmy that we had with other stars because he kind of segments himself away from us. But what I've seen in terms of his interactions, he seems the same to me. He seems, honestly, I've said this on Discord today, his relationship with Tyler looks better than it's ever been, honestly, even since his rookie year for sure. I see him joking around with Rozier. He seems, I know there's been certain times on the court where he's looked a little disengaged, but I don't think it's because he's pouting. And this thing about the hair, as he said, he can do his hair any way he wants. He's a troll. He's a troll. I say that with most respect. He's brought great amusement and joy, not just to Heat fans, but to those who cover. He's made things interesting for the past few years because, trust me, sometimes the roster hasn't, but he has. So I'm not saying that to disparage him. I'm just saying he gets off on this stuff, okay? And they're feeding right into it. But ESPN is just, in this particular case, right? And I have friends who work there, and we bring some of them here on the podcast. But what they've done lately is just completely irresponsible. I'm not speaking of Shams specifically. I'm speaking of, like, they had Shams on yesterday on the show, And they in the Chiron, which I guess most people don't know what Chiron is, but I worked in the TV. But it's basically like the lettering that it's on here if you're watching on YouTube right now. Okay, what link in description? 5 on the floor. That's Chiron. The Chiron they had at the top was Jimmy Butler trade request. What? It's no request. Like, even if you're saying these are teams he would go to, like, trade request is a loaded term. That means he walked into the Arison's office or Pat's office and said, please trade me. Okay, I thought quite as soon as it's going to be demand when there's nothing there. Like, yes, Dame made a trade request to the Portland Trailblazers, which, by the way, they didn't end up honoring in terms of going the direction that he wanted them to go. Okay, and that's why he's miserable in Milwaukee. But trade request is like that. That is, there's a specificity to that term. And
that deserves a scathing email to ESPN from the Heat. It really does.
It does. Well, when I sent it to somebody yesterday, they were like, "What was the word? Pretty irresponsible." And I could tell like they were doing it through gritted teeth. They just expected at this point. But that's just and to have and again, seems like a nice guy. I covered him for like one season in Cleveland. Okay. But to have Kendrick Perkins as your arbiter of all things NBA and you let Zach Lowe walk, that's like the equivalent, okay? We're talking about letting Jimmy Butler walk. I mean, that would have been like letting Bam Adebayo walk to re-sign Thomas Bryant to a 5-year, $110 million deal. I mean, what are they doing? And so, like, this is what we're supposed to be taking seriously here. Like, Shams is reporting on its face. Okay, again, he may have heard that and look, the agent could be lying. I'm not in the room. I don't know everything that's going on, but it doesn't even matter. It doesn't even matter where Jimmy would be willing to go until a team is ready to pony up the money that Jimmy wants. That's it.
And they would need to blow away the Heat with their trade offer.
Right. And nobody has said, here's the other thing. In these other reports that have come out, nobody has said that a team is looking to acquire and extend Jimmy Butler.
Yeah.
It's that, no, Jimmy's going to opt out and be a rental. Well, that limits how much a team is going to give up. If a team is not prepared to extend him, they're going to deal with this issue at the end of the year.
They saw it happen with Philly.
Right. And so there's no clear-cut way to know that he's going to stay or that he's going to have the right attitude about it if they're not planning to play him. What if he goes to a team, doesn't play well for the first 3 or 4 weeks, and it doesn't fit with their group? They don't want to, and he's unhappy for the rest of the time there. It also limits how much they're willing to pay in a trade, and not to him, but to the team, to the Heat. So if the Heat are saying the only way we're going to trade him is if we're blown away by an offer, who's going to blow them away with an offer for a rental? Like, and we've tried to look. Alex and I did the whole thing. We broke down all the Western Conference teams, which I can see some of them saying, okay, Jimmy Butler would make a big difference in our fortunes this year, whether it's Golden State, which definitely needs a running mate to Curry. He would fit perfectly there. Memphis, we talked about Houston. We've talked about Dallas. All these teams. They're all bunched up in the West between like 2 and 10.
Do it again.
Okay? We could do it again. But everything is like Jimmy would be okay going here. That's great. Like, Jimmy can't go join that team tomorrow. Right? The Heat hold the cards here. Now, Jimmy can make things difficult on the Heat, and he hasn't. He hasn't. As Barry keeps saying, Jimmy, for whatever issues he may cause behind the scenes, okay, he's difficult to deal with. Sometimes even the people around him acknowledge that. He has not been any more difficult this year, based on my knowledge, than he has been before. He hasn't pulled the Minnesota act or anything like that, or not shown up to a game. He was late to media day, okay, and then he said all the right things the next day. I just, you know what I'm saying? Like, I don't know why this became a week. I keep saying, I'll take the clicks, I'll take the downloads and all that sort of stuff, but I'm just going to try to tell you what I know. And what I know in this case is from talking to league people, but also from talking to the Heat, who are completely bewildered by what happened this week, because it's like, oh, somebody paid attention to us, and now we have all of these issues that we've had all along. There's nothing different here. I mean, I've had a receding hairline for a while. It'd be like somebody coming to me today and saying, God, you got to take care of that. No, it's been the same for a while. Okay. I'm Jewish. I'm glad I lasted this long. It doesn't mean like all of a sudden this became a crisis. Like one of my hairs fell out in the shower or something like that, and all of a sudden Shams is doing a report. That my hair has decided to choose a different drain. I mean, what are we doing here? So anyway, to close. The Heat don't have any offers. The Heat are not looking to trade Jimmy Butler. The Heat will not trade Jimmy Butler unless they get blown away with an offer. Most of these teams are not going to blow them away with an offer because Jimmy at this stage is likely a rental. The Heat are prepared to let him go into the offseason if he wants to and see if they can get playoff Jimmy again and try to make a run with this team. I don't know. Maybe they'll add to it. Obviously, we saw them make a move today. It wasn't an ad move, but maybe it sets them up for an ad move. They're prepared to go into the offseason, and if he opts out, they'll deal with it then with the possibility that he's going to need their cooperation if he doesn't want to stay here or if the parties decide that they want to go a different direction mutually, which is also a possibility. It's also a possibility that the Heat may want to move on after this season, that the Heat may be able to recoup assets with an opt-in and trade or a sign and trade. Is that it? Did I cover everything?
Aggregate it.
All 5 reasons is going to make a trade request because I need to put that up at the top of this. I think it's eternal, right? He's got to make the trade request first.
Yeah.
So we'll see. We trade somebody to Miami Heat beat. All right. Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the 5 on the Floor on the 5 Reasons Sports Network. After all, someone needs to listen to my dad.